So there's a small and slightly annoying change in the new version of JISC, which is that it no longer allows you to export your data as a .sav or a .sav. That made things a little bit easier in previous versions because it meant you could export all of the variable labels, you could export all the codes, all the category codes. You can't do that anymore, so it just involves an additional little step. This shouldn't take you too long. For a typical survey of this length, it should take about half an hour to get this all coded. But there's just a few steps that you need to follow in the right order to make that a little bit easier. So I've got a sample survey here with a couple of different format questions. So I've got question 1 on gender, which is your forced choice, one response. We have a Likert scale grid here, and we have a text question here, which hopefully if everyone answers it the way they should, then you'll just end up with some numbers, but there might be a bit of cleaning on that one. I've also gone ahead and gathered 6 responses. As you can see here, 6 responses, 6% rate. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate using this survey what you would do in a typical setting. So let's say you're at the end of your data collection period. You've got all your responses here. There's a bit you can do on the analysis side within JISC as well. It's fairly limited, but you can do some tables and you can do some cross-tabulation. Again, the functionality of it is fairly limited, so most of you will want to export your data. And depending on what you've studied, you might want to use either JASP, SPSS, or Stata. In my class, in my group, we will be using JASP. It's not the most functional one out there, but it's the easiest to use in terms of the level of analysis that you'll need to do for this project. So when we want to export our data, the first thing we're going to do is go up here. We're over here in Survey, and Analyze, and Download. When we go to download, you'll get 2 options, CSV and PDF. CSV is going to be your spreadsheet. When you click on this, you get a number of options. So you can select an uncoded CSV, a coded CSV, or a key file for coded CSV. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to download 2 formats. I'm going to download a coded CSV and I'm going to download the key file. The key file is going to help us when we get to setting up our variables in whatever program we're using. So our coded CSV is what it's going to do is instead of giving us the label for every response, so instead of recording in the spreadsheet cell female, male, it's going to record these as a numeric code. So 1 for female, 2 for male, 3 for transgender male, and so on. And that's going to be a bit more useful to us from in terms of importing the data, because if we don't do this, it's just going to mess everything up. So our coded CSV, there's 2 options here. We're going to ignore these and hit download. So I'm using Chrome. Your browser might dump it somewhere else, but usually it's going to end up in your downloads folder. We click on the file and it should take us to a relatively clean data grid. Yours will look a little bit different to mine. So what it's done is it has transformed each of these questions, the variables, with these little, it's changed the label of the question to either Q1. And if you go down here, you can see this is question 2, but question 2 in the original survey has 4 different sub-questions. So 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. You can see those responses there in your Excel sheet, 2.1, 2, 3, 4. And then question 3 is our age variable. What is your age? And we have a couple of different numbers in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as, I'm going to navigate to my folder. In this case, I'm using this one, which is on my iCloud drive, JISC folder, and I'm going to save it. So just be careful here to save as type. You want to make sure that this is set on this one here, CSV, delimited. By default, it's going to save it as a text file. Some programs can handle that, some of them can't. So this is the one format that will suit Stata, SPSS, and JASP. So CSV, and we'll give it a title, SO303. Survey 1. So again, if you're on Windows, it'll probably give you a couple of little prompts. Just click yes to all of these. We can close it down, hit save, and just keep hitting yes to this. Now the other thing I like to do is, we'll get out of our preview here. The other thing I like to do is to export a code book. So go back to Analyze, download CSV, and we're going to get this key file for coded CSV. This is useful because it just creates for us a little index that we can use or keep to the side when we're entering our data in whatever program we're using. So these are the original codes and labels, category codes and category labels assigned to each of these. So I'm going to save that as well. Format for this one is not as critical, I suppose, but again, we'll just, for consistency, we'll keep everything as a CSV, just so they're all visible in our reader. So I'm going to give this same name, codebook, save, and again, just keep hitting yes to all the different options. You save, save, save. Again, there's an easier way around this, but let's keep it simple for now. So now our data is exported, and if we are to go into our file browser and have a look, we can see here that we've got a couple of different ones. I'm just going to delete these just to keep everything nice and clean. Here's our survey 1, which is our data, and here's our survey codebook, which is our index for all of the codes. So we'll start with JASP. If we open up JASP, you'll see that you're taken to this, and again, I've got a full video series on Stata, SPSS, and JASP, so you'll just need to, for the analysis part, you just need to go to the relevant playlist. So we're going to import our data. We're going to go here to Open, Computer, Browse. You can see I've been doing this already just to make sure everything works, but in your case, your folder probably won't pop up here, so go to Browse, and then navigate your way to wherever the folder is that you saved everything. So in this case, I'm going to open up my survey, the original survey data, which is here. And you can see when it asks for file type, it'll accept these .jasp, CSV, text, .sav, which we used to be able to export from JISC, but unfortunately we can't do it anymore. Click open, and there's our data as it was originally. So the two things we want to do are, you might want to change these variable labels, but I like to keep them as they are because it makes everything nice and consistent between the original file in JISC and the survey builder. And these aren't the worst labels, to be quite honest, because they give you a fairly consistent labeling system. And another thing we're going to want to do then is also to change our level of measurement, which I'll talk about in a moment. So the reason I usually keep this survey codebook is because what we want to do is we want to assign each of these values to each of the category labels, and just keeping this open here beside us is a nice way to manage all that. So what about question 1? So question 1 is our gender question. Which gender do you most closely identify with? And we've got a couple of different categories here. If I click on the label field here, the question label, you see here that I've got a range of values. Now in the survey, why is it only showing values 1, 2, and 5? Because in the survey was only answered by people identifying as female, male, or non-binary. That's why it's only displaying the values for those responses that actually have response data in them. So value 1, I'll just click up here in the label field, and I can enter female for value 1, male for value 2, and non-binary for value 3. When you click those three, you'll see the label starting to appear there in the data viewer. Question 2 then is, this is not relevancy. Unfortunately, what it does is, and you can, if you want, you can delete this column in the data sheet before you export it, because when it ends up in JASP, it gets a little bit annoying, but again, it doesn't really matter. Question 2, part 1, we have our Likert scale: strongly disagree, disagree, neither, agree, and agree strongly. You can just go in there and one by one, again, nobody's answered category number 1 there, so our value 2 is going to be disagree. Value 3 is going to be neither. Value 4, agree. And value 5, strongly agree. And again, it's just a matter of clicking through that piece by piece and setting up the relevant codes. These ones are going to be the same, these are going to be the same, and these are going to be the same. Now the other thing you want to keep an eye on is this thing here, this level of measurement. Again, for variables, and go back to your second year methods text if you're struggling to remember this. Male, female, non-binary, this is a categorical variable, or what we would more specifically call a nominal variable. The categories only vary in kind, they don't vary in quantity. We want to make sure that we're setting that correctly. So variables like this are measured at the nominal level. This one here is blank, we can ignore that. These Likert scales are ordinal, so these are set correctly. where the responses are in rank order. They're not real numbers. This one here, age, is a real number, so we want to make sure that we record this as a scale variable. So again, now if we go into our, if we want to create a table of answers, let's say for question 2_1, and again, there's a separate video on this that you can look at in your own time. Transfer to the variables box, indicate that it's a frequency table, and now we get a table with our values included. So setting up your survey in JASP is just a matter of going through each of the different questions in turn, setting up the values in the data viewer, and then advancing up here to do your analysis. So as you can see, I've launched SPSS through Minute Apps Anywhere. Once you've recovered from the trauma of this, just click New Dataset up here and Open, and you'll be brought to a blank landing page with your data view and your variable view down here in the bottom left hand side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import that datasheet by going up here to File, Import Data, and down here to CSV Data. In my File Explorer, there's a couple of ways to navigate back to the folder that you're in, but I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go down to my iCloud drive, over here to my JISC folder, and there's my data set here, which I can open and import the data. So first thing, the default line here says first line contains variable names. Yes, it does. And we don't want to change anything else. Click OK. Give it a couple of seconds to work and you'll see that it is imported. And now it's opened up the output viewer as well. So here we have, again, this Q2 one is irrelevant because it's just kind of an indicator that we're entering this little block here of Likert questions. And when I switch into variable view, you'll see that I have a couple of options now available to edit my variables. So data view, here's our responses. You can actually go ahead and delete this one if you want. You can just clear that entire variable. It's not really useful. Back in variable view, and again, what we can do when we're setting this up is we can just have our code book displayed side by side just to make sure we remember everything that we're talking about. And again, kind of similar to what we did in JASP, you can give your variable a longer label here if you want. You might want to write the full text of the question, which gender. For the sake of illustration, I'm just going to give it a shorthand title. So this one was hate math. This one was understand. Again, when you're doing this yourself, you might want to enter the full text of the question. You can do that. It's got enough space for you to do that. The next one is building survey. The next one is analysis. Can't spell, sorry. Bloody hell. And then the last one is age. There we go. Now again, a couple of things. Age is, it's already detected that age is a scale variable. That's fine. The first one, as we saw before, was nominal. This is our gender variable. And the Likert scales are all ordinal. The responses are in rank order. Again, a lot of these strongly agree. These different semantics and that are at the ordinal level as well. So we can change the level of measurement like this. And then the last thing we need to do is to set up our responses. So again, following the code book, we've got 1 for female, 2 for male. How do we do this? This happens up here in the values column in variable view. We click into values. And just click anywhere in the field. We have this little 3 dots, which in SPSS is usually something that indicates extra options. So we go ahead and click this, and it takes us to a field where we can start adding our value labels. So this is the value label selector. Over here we've got plus, where we can add in the first one. Let's say for our first variable, the value is 1 and the label is female. Again, just reading this off the sheet here. We have another category, which is number 2, which is male. And again, just to keep everything neat, make sure you follow whatever format you've used here for capitalizing and whatever. Number 3 is transgender male. Number 4, transgender female. And number 5 is non-binary. Click OK, and then those become active up here. You might want to extend some of these fields as well, just to give yourself a bit more room. The next one then is our Likert scale. So same, we add number 1, which is, I'm just going to use shorthand for these, but again, when you're typing this yourself, you might want to put the full strongly disagree, neither, and so on. But just for the sake of speed, I'm going to run through it here a bit quickly. We've got our agree, and number 5, strongly agree. Once that's done, go ahead, and the nice thing about this is you can copy and paste. So you can copy and paste, or you can just do the shortcut on the keyboard, Control-C, and then Control-V, Control-V. We don't want anything here. Why? Because we don't have any numeric codes. Our age is a scale variable. It's entered as the respondent's age, 22, 23, 24. So we just leave that one alone as it is. So now, again, following the other video series, you'll be able to go through the specific instructions for how to analyze. But if we decide to build a table with any one of these variables, we can now have a table that displays the full variable labels. You see female, male, non-binary, 33.3%, 2 in each, so a full third of the sample in each one. If we wanted to analyze our age variable, same thing, we just transfer age over here. Now we've got our variable title, which is here age, and we see the mean age is 24, standard deviation 4.8. So now I've opened Stata again through Apps Anywhere, got Stata running, and I want to import my data. 2 ways to do this, but again, broadly similar to what we've done in the previous 2. We can go to File, Import, and we see our CSV option here. Go to Browse, and browse to our folder. Might take a second to load up. Again, you can navigate to your own folder using any of the different options around here. It'll look a bit different on Mac as well. But here's our sheet, SO303 Survey 1, open. And it gives you a little preview here of what the data grid's going to look like. That looks good. We don't need to reset anything here. We can just leave it on default. Click OK. And now you'll see that when we open up our data viewer, we're here. Here's our data editor, sorry. And we've got our, same as before, Q1, Q2 underscore 1, Q2. So again, looks the same as it does, or did when we launched in SPSS. We can drop this variable if we want, and just to make things a little bit neater. But again, what we want to do now is we want to set up our codes and our labels as we did with the previous ones. So how do we do that? What I'm going to do is, again, depending on how you've learned to use Stata, you might either be typing in the command line here, you might be using the drag and drop menus, or you might be using do files. I always recommend that you use a do file for this to keep track of what you're doing. So we've got our variables over here, and again I'm going to pull up the code book just to keep it open for reference, and that's pretty much everything we need. So the first thing we might want to do is we might want to relabel these variables. Now what that's going to do, it's not going to affect the response categories, it's going to give us a more intelligible title for these, right? So let's say we want to take variable Q1. Simply type label var Q1, and again this is our variable name. We always want to work from the variable names as they appear in the name column over here. Label var Q1, and we might give this, you can type the text of the question if you want, doesn't really matter. And remember, to execute or to run a piece of code from a do file, you just highlight it, click on the line, and click run up here, execute selection. So you can see what that's done there. It's changed straight away the label for Q1, which is now gender. And we can keep going doing the same thing for each of the different variables in turn. So the next one is Q2 underscore 1, open our inverted commas, and this is, if we wanted to give it its full title, I hated math in school. To run that as well, let's drag and drop, execute, and then you could do the same for these going down to Q2, Q3. I'm just going to do the last one again just for illustration. So this is Q3, open our inverted commas, this one is age, highlight the line, either Control D or execute selection. That's going to change. Now in your version you'll do it obviously for all of your variables. So what do we do about the response categories? The fact that what we want to run a table, let's say of Q1, which is gender. So far all we have is we've got 1, 2 and 5, which we know corresponds to female, male and non-binary. We want to change these essentially into, instead of numbers, we've got 1 equals female, 2 equals male. What we need to do first is we need to define a labeling scheme. It's an additional step, but it's going to make things a lot easier for questions like these that have a same or a similar rating scale. So we're going to define a labeling scheme, and we're going to call our labeling scheme gender. Or you call it gen, you call it anything you want. Keep it simple, we'll call it gender. Now this is where I need to refer back to my index sheet. I've got code 1, which is going to be female. So what I'm doing is I'm placing the numeric code next to the text, and I'm placing that between inverted commas. So as we work through this, following the same format, again, space between each unique code, working through this, gender, transgender, male. Always remember to close the inverted commas or you'll get an error message. And this one is female. And then our final one, number 5, is non-binary. Close our inverted commas. When we run this piece of code, you'll see in the console, nothing happens, but we'll just get, okay, here we've got an error. And this is a nice moment, I suppose, for figuring out where the error is coming from. That's probably coming from the brackets here that it doesn't particularly like. So we'll just clean that up. Run it again. And we see that our issue is that we haven't closed our inverted commas. And we see the issue here is that we haven't closed our inverted commas. So we go back and run this again. And you see it's not giving us that invalid syntax message, it's just repeating the code. That means it's worked. Now we can assign that labeling scheme to a variable. So the code for this is label values. So which variable do we want to label the values in? We want to label variable Q1, and we want to use the labeling scheme gender. When we do that, it will assign that labeling scheme to that variable. And now when we go back into our data viewer, you can see that we have our codes assigned instead. That means that if we go to create a table, again, we'll keep everything in the do file. We go to tabulate Q1, instead of giving us this, which is our 1, 2, 5, it gives us this, female, male, non-binary. Again, same as we saw in JASP and same as we saw in SPSS. I'm going to do one of the Likert scale variables just to show you. So we're going to define a labeling scheme called Likert, where code number 1 is going to be strongly disagree. Code number 2 is going to be disagree. 3 is neither. 4 is agree. And 5 is strongly disagree. Quick check to make sure we've closed all our inverted commas, and we're going to run this. Hopefully that's run okay. Yeah, it likes that. So now we have a labeling scheme called Likert. Nice thing about this is we can assign this to any of the variables that we want. We can label the values in, the first one is Q2_1. We can label that Likert. Nice thing there is we can just copy this down for the other 3, making sure we change the variable names. Run that all at once. And now we've got a labeling scheme where we have all of these values assigned each of those variables. Again, it's the same labeling scheme for each of these, so we can just repeat it as we want. We don't need to label age, because again, age is recorded as a number. So if we wanted to sum age, sorry, that's not age, it's called Q3. Again, just it's a good reminder there actually. The variable name is not age, the variable name is Q3. So in your command, we want to make sure that we're typing the variable name, not like I've done. So Q3 is the variable name. And it gives us our summary statistics. Mean age 24.5, youngest person is 21, oldest person is 34. If we wanted to tabulate any of our Likert variables, we'll try this one, Q2_3. We now have the labeling scheme in place instead of the numbers that we would have found before. So again, make sure you save everything, but that's how we do assign labels from JISC data to SPSS, JASP and Stata format.